The sun dipped low behind the hills, casting long shadows over the abandoned stretch of railroad that cut like a scar across the dry plains. The tracks were rusted, half swallowed by wild grass and thyme. Telegraph lines hung limp, swaying in the wind like forgotten ghosts. John Hawthorne sat at the reins of his mule-pulled wagon, boots dust-caked, jaw tight. His son, Luke, no older than 8, sat beside him, legs dangling, eyes scanning the landscape with a mix of curiosity and hunger. They had left the last settlement at dawn, chasing whispers of salvaged rail iron that might fetch a few dollars. If they could haul it back before nightfall, that was how they lived now in whispers, and what was left behind. John hadn't always been a scavenger. Once he'd worn blue, marched under flags. Once he'd owned land, a wife, even dreams. The war took pieces from men in ways no doctor could stitch back. Fever took Mary in spring, and the drought did the rest. Oh, it was just him and the boy, dragging their wagon across a landscape that seemed to want them gone. John hadn't spoken much that day, but he noticed Luke studying him the way kids do when they're trying to understand what sadness really is. A sharp, unnatural cry pierced the air. High-pitched, weak. Luke jerked upright. "You hear that?" John narrowed his eyes. "Coyote pups, maybe?" "No. Pa, that ain't no pup." They stopped. John listened. There it was. Again like a kitten, maybe smaller, desperate, human. Luke jumped down, already heading toward the old switch house off the tracks. "Wait," John called, climbing down after him, his boots crunching gravel. The building was half collapsed, roof sagging, door swinging crooked on rusted hinges. Luke pushed it open with both hands, and inside, amid rotted crates and shattered glass, was an apple crate wrapped in linen. A baby lay in it. She couldn't have been more than a few weeks old, dread-cheeked, fists curled like blossoms. Her cries slowed the moment she saw them. John stepped forward slowly. There was something beside her, a knapsack, frayed, stitched. With old army thread, Union military issue. He knew the texture by touch. Inside was nothing but a sealed letter, yellowed with time, addressed in faded ink. To RT, 10th Infantry. He stared at it too long. Luke looked up. "What's that mean?" John didn't answer, just sat back on his heels, rubbing his temples. "10th Infantry," he muttered. "That was mine," Luke whispered. "Mama wouldn't leave her." John's breath hitched. His jaw twitched. The baby whimpered. He stood, peeled off his coat, and wrapped her in it without a word. They carried her back to the wagon. No one said much. As the wheels turned and the mule pressed on, the wind lifted an old flag tangled in the brush, a torn piece of the Union banner, edges scorched, flapping like a ghost, refusing to die. By morning, the baby's skin had turned clammy. Her cries were weaker, now less demand, more desperation. John pressed the back of his hand to her forehead and cursed under his breath. Fever. Out here. That kind of heat could pull the breath. From a baby's lungs, before the next sunrise, storm clouds had gathered fast, black and low, and swollen with rain. John snapped the reins, pushing the mule harder along the muddy trail that led toward a trader's shack he'd passed to winters ago. He prayed it was still standing. Luke held the baby, rocking her, whispering songs their mother used to sing. John could barely stand to hear it. The road turned slick, the ruts deep with new water, and then the wind changed. A wall of brown. Water roared down from the hills, too fast, too wild. John pulled the wagon off the road, shouting for Luke to hold tight as the current swept past where the trail used to be. They were trapped. He found a hollow beneath an outcrop half dry, shielded by jutting stone. They waited out the flash flood there, the fire small and hissing against the rain. The girl wouldn't feed. Luke coughed into his elbow, again and again. John knelt beside the fire, fists clenched, jaw shaking. Should have left her, he said bitterly. We had no right to take this on. Luke wrapped the baby tighter in his coat. She's not what's wrong. You are. The words cut deeper than John wanted to admit. He stood suddenly, slamming his fist against the wagon frame. The baby cried out, and he turned away, his shoulders shaking, hiding tears he hadn't let himself cry in years. Lightning flashed behind the rocks. For a moment, it lit up a figure standing just beyond the firelight. Tall, still, watching. John turned, hand to his rifle. But the figure made no move. Rain pelted down. The man stepped forward. Apache. Mid-40s. Face weathered like dry stone. A scar riding down one cheek. He didn't speak, didn't blink, just studied the man, boy, baby. Then, without a word, he walked closer and dropped a small leather pouch near the fire. Before John could react, he was gone, swallowed by the storm. John opened the pouch. With caution, inside dried roots, wild herbs, and a powder that smelled faintly of goat's milk. He stared into the night and shouted into the wind, "Why help us?" No answer came. It's just the cry of a hawk echoing in the distance. By dawn, the baby was drinking. Not much, but enough. Her color had returned just slightly, her tiny fingers curling into Luke's. John sat by the fire, the letter still in his hand. The seal was waxed, but faded. The name on it hadn't changed. 2 RT 10th Infantry. Luke watched him closely. What if she's someone's? John stared at the embers. She is. But they didn't come for her. That tells me enough. We fed the envelope into the flames. The paper curled and turned to smoke. But the letter itself, he kept it. Sometimes it ain't just the war that leaves bodies behind, he muttered. It's the truth, too. Later that morning, as they hitched the wagon and moved on, John looked to the cliffs above. There far off, almost a silhouette, stood the same Apache rider, watching. Still, he wasn't wandering. He was following. Or maybe tracking something that had just begun. Asked ChatGPT. The town of Gallows Creek sat hunched beside the broken rail line like it was waiting to die. A cluster of warped wood buildings, one saloon with smoke curling through its cracked roof, and a blacksmith whose hammer rang like a warning bell in a dead canyon. John pulled the wagon into the edge of town, keeping his hat low and his eyes lower. Luke stayed with the baby in the wagon bed, tucked beneath blankets and a flour sack. John stepped into the saloon and ordered a sack of oats and hard biscuits. The barkeep, a pale man with red eyes and a twitching lip, didn't ask many questions till John placed a coin on the counter. "You just passing through?" the barkeep asked, glancing toward the wagon. John shrugged. "Looking for work? Got mouths to feed." The man leaned closer. "You're not the first asking about a baby lately." John didn't blink. "That's so?" 3 fellas in Confederate gray came through not 2 days back. Didn't drink. Just asked who'd been seen with children. One of them said, "He's got 2 brats. One of 'em ain't his." John's hand rested near his coat pocket, where the revolver stayed. He didn't finish the sentence. He just left the supplies half-bagged on the counter and walked out. They were back on the trail by dusk, taking a different road, one not marked on any map. Luke cradled the baby in his lap. Her eyes blinked up, drowsy and unaware. "She's in danger," Luke said softly, "ain't she?" John didn't answer. He just nodded once and looked ahead to where the hills began. That night, they found Red Tree's camp tucked deep in a canyon, beyond the reach of riders or lawmen. The Apache stood by the fire, silent as always, watching John approach with the baby in his arms. John didn't speak right away. He lowered himself to the fire, laid the baby down gently between them, and finally looked Red Tree in the eye. "You've been following us, why?" Red Tree's voice came like stones sliding down a riverbed, low, broken, deliberate. "White. Men kill what they don't understand. That child is not just lost. She is feared." John stared at the flickering light dancing across her face. "Feared by who?" Red Tree squatted beside the fire. "I rode with the 10th Infantry. Scout. I saw things. Carried messages. Followed orders from men whose hands never got dirty. One of them was Colonel Thayer." John froze. Took what he wanted. Land, people, secrets. Then he buried the evidence. Men like that don't leave loose threads. Child, she wears cloth from his regiment. Same stitching, same weave. You think that's coincidence? John looked down at the baby, his breath caught. What if she's his? He asked. Red Tree shook his head. Or what if she saw something they need forgotten? The fire popped and crackled. Luke had fallen asleep beside the mule, curled. Up with a blanket, John whispered. She holds more truth in her than all those bastards riding behind us. Red Tree said nothing, but his eyes said he agreed. John sat back, staring up at the stars. Then I ain't just carrying her for her sake. I'm carrying her for mine. He vowed it then. Not to run anymore, not just to survive. He would protect her. Not because she was a mystery or because of what she might be, but because she deserved more than men like Thayer ever gave anyone. As the fire dimmed, a low mist curled around the canyon, thick, cold, and through it. Far up on the ridge, the silhouettes of 3 horses emerged. Still, watching, they were closer now. Bounty riders had found them. Ask ChatGPT. John crouched low behind a row of rock and thorn, his breath shallow, his fingers slick with sweat and blood as he finished tying the last wire trap. The bluff trail was narrow, a natural funnel that would force the riders into a single path. He didn't have numbers on his side, just time, instinct, and desperation. Red Tree was higher up in the cave with Luke and the baby, eyes tracking every shadow below, his bow strung and his tomahawk close. The fog hadn't lifted since dawn had curled between the stones, muting sound, dulling distance. But John knew they were coming. He felt it in the air, the stillness before the storm. Then came the hooves, dull thuds against dirt. 3 horses. 3 riders. John waited until the first rider crossed the wire, then pulled hard on the rope. The trap snapped up with a shriek of tension. One rider's horse reared, screaming, and threw its rider into the rocks. Gunfire erupted. John returned fire, his arm jolting with pain as a bullet tore across his shoulder. He dropped behind the boulders, gritting his teeth as another shot rang out. The second rider ducked behind a stump and aimed for the cave. Red Tree emerged like a ghost, silent and swift. The twang of his bow broke the air, and the second rider collapsed with a choked gasp. But the third was fast. He had circled high and was now sprinting toward the cave mouth. John screamed, "No!" As the man surged past him, Red Tree met him at the entrance. The baby's cry rose in the air, piercing through the chaos. The rider grabbed the child, lifting her like a shield. Red Tree didn't hesitate. He lunged with his tomahawk, striking the man's arm. The rider staggered, fired once point blank. Red Tree jerked back, blood blooming on his side. He finished the kill with a final thrust before falling to his knees. John was already there, catching the baby as Red Tree slid to the ground. He pressed his hand to the wound, but Red Tree only smiled faintly, breath shallow. "This secret," he whispered, "is your burden now." John's hands trembled as he lowered him gently. The Apache's eyes never closed, they simply faded. Later, after the smoke cleared and the baby was calm again in Luke's arms, John searched the last rider's saddlebag. Inside, beneath rounds and tobacco, was a bounty notice. It wasn't for the baby. Name: Captain Roland Thayer, executed for desertion. Surviving child designated for federal claim. Bloodline tied to disputed western lands. John stood still for a long time. Made sense now. She wasn't just a mystery or a mistake. She was in the way, a loose end to tie up. An inheritance someone didn't want claimed? He stared at the paper, then he crumpled it, fed it to the flames, and didn't look back. "She doesn't need a legacy," he murmured. "She needs a father." The wind carried ash into the sky. Months passed, seasons softened. The ranch John built wasn't much, just 2 rooms, a chimney that leaned west, and fences held up by stubborn will. But it stood. It held warmth. It held promise. Luke helped stack firewood. The baby Grace, they called her, nawabbled on, her feet in the high grass, chasing shadows and butterflies. Her laugh had become part of the land. One evening, as the sun dipped and the last light danced through pine, John sat by the grave up on the ridge. A simple stone, a feather resting beside it. He wrote in a journal, his hand steady. "You once said truth survives only if someone carries it. I carry her now." He closed the book. Grace's laughter echoed from below. He stood, hat in hand, and let the wind take her joy into the canyon where the silence no longer felt so empty. Ask ChatGPT.